Go ahead and call the meeting to order. Start off with the roll call. Be here. Barrington. Here. Nichols. Here. And Councilor Bottom should be here shortly, and Councilor Schultz is out of town this week. So we'll just go right into the work session topic for today, which is the first draft of the 2024 budget.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Mickey is going to go ahead and walk through the budget presentation.
Yep, thank you, Mayor and Council. So I will be going through the first draft of the 2024 preliminary budget. So first off, we have the timeline. We will need to adopt the preliminary budget by September 30th. So we will be presenting a final version of the preliminary budget by September 14th council meeting. August 24th, we have an additional work session scheduled for the second draft of the budget. And then we will be presenting a draft version of the water and sewer budget in September or October. We will have to adopt the final levies and the budget by December 28th.
With our meeting schedule, realistically, we have to do it by
December 18th, we have one meeting in December is what we currently have slated.
So starting off with preliminary budget information, staff is estimating that the preliminary tax capacity will be 21,676,000. You take that less the train line item and contribution, which is $610,000 estimated right now. And then that gives you the estimated adjusted tax capacity of 21,066,000. The 2024 draft tax levy is currently at $9,544,871. Taking that equation that I have on the PowerPoint on the screen, that gives you a tax capacity rate currently of 43.824%. Note that all of these numbers are very preliminary numbers, and the county will come out with actual estimate as we near the second work session. 2023 actual tax capacity rate this year is 42.122. So that is a increase from this year's tax capacity rate. So I do have the actual market value change that the county is stating for each of the different zones. So agricultural properties went up 7%, commercial went up 8.4%, industrial 15.9%, and single residential households went up 3.9% for the market value change.
those are all averages, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Quite as bad as last year, though, still. Worse. It's worse, really. Great. Not one. Everyone that.
So these next few slides, I have a few different scenarios of how the market value and the tax rate affects residential property values. So on the first scenario, this would be with the current drafted tax capacity rate of the 43.824%. With that 3.9% market value increase. So you can see for a house that's currently valued at, let's just pick 750,000, their market value would be increased to 779,000. Their city tax portion would be an increase of $255.84 for the year. If we went forward with the draft tax capacity rate of 43.824%. On the next slide, this scenario would be no change in tax rate. So if we can keep the tax capacity rate at 42.122%, which is what we have for 2023, for that same house, that $750,000 value house, that would be an increase of $123.21. In order to get us to where we need to be with the current estimated tax capacity numbers, we would need to cut budget by $358,560. And then on the next scenario, in order to have no increase in the city tax portion of property taxes, we would have to decrease the tax capacity rate 1.83%. In order to have no increase in the city tax portion at all. And that would be, we would have to lower budget by $745,000.
Which would be growth by how much over this year?
Sorry,
What would that represent in terms of growth over 2023?
in terms of growth.
So the difference between
Oh,
compared to last year.
like in the budget wise, like number wise, we would have to, let me do a quick calculation. So the tax levy would have to. The dollar amount would be an increase of $1.642 million from last year's budget amount, from last year's tax levy amount.
So that would be how much more we would collect next year just based on additional properties coming into the tax base at a higher level.
How much, yeah, how much more we would have to budget for, well, so currently our increase in tax levy between this year's budget and last year's budget is 2.386 million. So we would have to get that down to an increase of only 1.6 million. Mhm.
The tax capacity, we're getting more tax capacity, but it's
Mhm.
with the
We
growth.
would, yeah, we would still have to decrease budget by that much.
How much should that tax capacity increase is gonna go towards water tower, water treatment, stuff like that?
It is not
Mm,
factored into the
yeah.
budget.
You could just go
So none, so
just say,
That's all self-funded.
I
Yeah,
don't,
that-
I just say,
that one is,
because.
Not for your benefit, but anybody who might come back.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah.
so it is not, these, the projected potential increases, which we're looking at a variety of. As Maggie said, a variety of different paths to get the budget set. It will have certainly a potential for an increase in rates depending on, not necessarily a rate increase, but a potential impact to what you'd see in dollar wise for
Mhm.
depending on which decisions we make for what's in the budget.
Thank you, Maggie. Sorry to.
Yeah. No problem. So these are all preliminary numbers to just to keep that in mind. So we will get more actual numbers as the next work session comes around. So this slide, I have a revenue year by year comparison of where we were at in 2023 for budget wise compared to this year's current budget draft. So it's pretty similar, just very minor changes in the percentage allocation. For example, licenses and permits went down 2% because the building permit, revenue line item, we had split up and are more transparent on this year's draft budget, where that should actually be going. For example, building permit,
Surcharges.
building permit plan check fees were moved over to charges for service, because that was previously all lumped into the building permit line item. And then other permit fees were lumped into building permit line item as well, like plumbing permit, gas permits, and mechanical permits. So we had split that out, and then that will help staff report to Dolly better. So more accurate numbers. This slide is a year-to-year comparison of the expenditures and where our expenditures are being allocated to. So very minimal changes again. The biggest budget impacts on this draft 2024 budget. Just if you could go to the next slide. Staff costs would be one of the biggest budget impact. We have that 7% increase, the 3% market adjustment, and the 4% COLA, cost of living increase. And then we have that 10% increase in health insurance costs, split 70-30 by the employer and the employee. And then we also added in recruitment and retention for staff. Contracted service is also one of the biggest budget impacts. Assessing is estimated to be $165,000 for 2024, which is an increase of $45,000 from what we have budgeted previously. 2023 actual assessing fees came in at $150,000 compared to what we have budgeted, which was $120,000. Fire service, we are estimating a 27.7% increase based on the increase between 2022 and 2023. So that would be $158,000.
Would that likely be already different based on information got this morning?
Yes,
Yeah.
Maggie and I talked a bit about that. We are expecting to see about a $25,000 decrease from the West Suburban Fire District. And we have not gotten numbers yet from Roger. So as soon as we have those two pieces, we'll be able to better identify exactly what the fire number will be for this year. As of the first draft, we wanted to put in worst case scenario to really know what that would look like.
Paved streets, we are anticipating a $115,000 increase. On paved street contracted services, we're anticipating a $55,000 increase. And then with this year's draft budget, we have the 2024 draft budget, we have the 2023 A bond, increase of $373,590 on the general tax levy. So to conclude, staff will continue to refine the budget as the next work session arises. Staff is looking for further directions from council, such as if there's any policy or program changes you would like staff to look at and to consider as we move forward with refining the draft budget more.
Thank you.
Mhm.
You guys have anything you want to say about this or any comments?
Can you give a summary of the new positions and new services we're looking at adding? I think I saw some technical items added. Is there anything we need that?
Yeah, so.
I can answer it. So on my staff memo, we have a part-time for general government section of the budget. We have that part-time intern for administration department for a full year. However, I believe it's only 0.5 FTE, I believe. And then we have a transition of the part-time communication to a full-time, and that adds benefit to that position as well. And that would be effective date of January 1st, 2024. We have election judges included since it is a presidential election year in 2024. And then a full-time IT personnel with a start date of January 1, 2024. In the Public Works and Parks Department, we have an increase in part-time and seasonal public works employee hours by approximately 0.5 FTE, which is 1,030 hours is what we had increased the budget by. We have a part-time program coordinator increase in hours from 960 hours to 1,040 hours. And that position will then be para pension eligible. In the Public Safety Department, we are transitioning the 2 part-time CSO position to 1 full-time position, and that will include benefits then as well. And then we have an increase in part-time police officer hours by 500 hours, which is 0.25 FTE. And then we added on a part-time police technician with a start date of January 1st, 2024. And then 1 full-time equivalent of a part-time medical responder. And with this year's budget as well, that would be a whole entire year of the fire commander position. Whereas last year we only budgeted for a quarter's worth.
A couple notes on the staffing items. Last year we had talked about adding an IT person, and we've really seen the need for having some additional IT services, whether it's in the council chambers that have, or whether it's on a day-to-day basis. We're just seeing just a need for those IT services, and having someone in-house who, you know, if you get the 2-step verification and not being able to get that taken care of, you know, there's just a bit of a process. So that it's definitely something to note. Those election judges, we have 1 extra election with a presidential election year, so you'll see those costs higher than you typically would on non-presidential election years. Yeah. And then
We give that for the federal government.
you have ideas, we're all yours. But the part-time administration intern, that's something we've floated for a few years to see if that's something that we might be able to do.
Part-time administration.
An intern for the to do a number of projects, and that's something that, you know, something that we'll have to evaluate if that's something that we want to move forward with the budget and the way it's written today. And we've talked about in the past, making communications more of a full-time position. So I think that those were kind of the ideas behind those changes in Public Works and Parks, allowing for some additional hours for seasonals to help out with something that we were looking at, rather than adding any full-time staff this year or for 2024. And then the part-time recreation program coordinator, we're just trying to figure out the exact hours we'll need for that position, since it's a newer position in the last year or two. And so whether or not we exactly, we'll need to look at that just a bit further. But then in the public safety realm, the community service officers, Matt can talk a bit about.
Yeah, we currently budget for 40 hours a week for CSOs. We had it split between 2 part-time, and it's been extremely helpful. What it's allowed us to do as we added that over the last few years is recapture some of the hours for higher paid employees like the deputy director and people from doing some of those tasks. So it's been successful. One of the things we did find is that it would be good to have some continuity of having 1 full-time person as opposed to the 2 part-time. Eventually, I think we will add part-time people back in nights and weekends in the coming years. as, you know, kind of a career development opportunity, but there's enough projects that would need maybe the continuity of a full-time person to carry. You know, things that you guys might see would be like speed signs or, you know, the calls for animal service, general public assist type stuff. So looking to try and get at least, you know, like one full-time person, and in the coming years, as time allows, try and bring back the evening and weekend part-time folks. So that was kind of the philosophy that we've been working on with the CSO position. The part-time police officer hours, I think most of that is related to coverage for sabbaticals. Wasn't that part of what we talked about, Maggie, for part-time police officer hours? The police technician is a position that we previously had. But it went away as Amy Fadden transitioned to the second admin assistant position in the police department. And part of that is talking about as we start bringing on responsibility for fire related duties, you know, with the fire person that we talked about towards the end of this year, we're going to start preparing for what does the future look like of fire records as we start doing the inspections and the business visits that we talked about, trying to house them as a city instead of 3 different places. So that's somewhat in preparation for that. The part-time medical responders, we have 1 FTE in there, which of part-time folks, which would probably equate to something starting like the second half of the year. I'm not confident that we would have the demand at that point yet. We want to be ready and prepared for that program, which would be one of the first orders of business with that, you know, the later to be discussed fire person that's going to be taking over business visits, fire inspections, our public safety plan review. And then they would also be really getting into the call analysis that for the data we've been collecting on when is the point that it makes sense to bring on people. We're not at that point where we need them right now, but when, depending on how quickly St. Teresa's different functions come up, how many times we're called there, how long Bellwether, Amberley takes to build out, and we see what impact we see on our calls for service there. So that one's one of those that's maybe a placeholder that if there was low hanging fruit in public safety, that could, the medical responders would be something we can take a look at. Yeah, and that kind of sums up the staffing part from the public safety end of it.
I was going to ask about the automated license plate readers, and if that would be valuable to the police as part of our planning for next year in terms of optimizing officer hours and the effectiveness of the.
Yes, absolutely. And so there's 2 officers that are going to the meetings to try and iron that out. So Tim and Pete are the ones that are working on that, and I need to check in with them and find out where we're at. One of the things that we had talked about was, you know, obviously when we get something put together and kind of get a plan defined, those do have annual carrying costs with them. If we needed to, that's one of the ideas that we've had to jumpstart that program potentially with some of the public safety funding dollars from the state. And I think we've also looked at some of the potential future fire needs coming from some of those funds as well. But so that you're correct, the ALPR, those canvas, that funding is not in here for that budget, but it's also, I don't know that they have that plan fully defined yet, but I am due for a check-in with them.
I would support at least doing a pilot for next year.
Yeah.
We've had enough issues where it might be helpful for stolen cars driven in and huge crimes, so.
Absolutely.
And maybe getting, I know you've talked in the past about having that company, forget the name, but having some council.
Yep. Absolutely.
Probably would be a little ways out now, so we have a schedule for work session.
I was gonna say, would you prefer that in a work session format?
Yes. Probably, but it doesn't necessarily have to be if we have a light meeting.
It might allow more dialogue for the 2 people, for Tim and Pete as well, that they might want to talk about where the where and the why and the locations. Because I asked them to come up with recommendations if we're going to do a phased approach, where's, you know, what the priorities are and why, and, you know, and how we would get there. Obviously, we've had discussions about what our limitations might be on placement, is what right away we have access to and that equipment. But yeah, I'm getting a little off topic, but from the budget, but yeah, I think that's definitely something we're still working on.
So what session is what you're thinking, just like for the calendar?
Yes.
Yeah. Probably ways out.
Oh, in November. Yeah.
So I guess my initial reaction is there's a lot of ads. Not that that's necessarily inappropriate. I think we're coming to the point where we're gonna need to take the increase in fire costs seriously and start to get ahead of that for the sake of future reductions. We can't continue to have it grow at 25% a year, so at some point we've got to pull the trigger on that. I would like to see the tax rate stay the same as we're saying, and I'm sure you'll hear the same from the two members who aren't here, given their statement and the other two that are here. And that could be two. I'm not sure which elements are most deferrable or most reducible. I guess one other question I had that I neglected to mention earlier, with the market adjustment that was on the first slide and the COLA increase, do we feel like that market adjustment gets us to parity? Or is this gonna continue having to step up over time? Like, how far away are we from being at a market comparable level?
I can speak to police. So Medina just settled a contract. And I think it's starting this year. And as you're aware, we made a substantial investment in the last police contract. Our officers prior to that contract were paid slightly higher than the Medina officers. And with Medina's last contract starting in I believe it's 2024, that their officers, they added longevity, so their officers with 10 or 15 years of experience will be making about $3 an hour more than our officers. So I think it was absolutely necessary. I think we didn't, from the police perspective anyway, we certainly didn't overshoot the market. And it'll remain to be seen that with that third year of the contract at 4%, where that leaves us in comparables. So that's a small amount of information as it relates to the police end of things anyway.
And in terms of where everything else, I think Maggie is working on putting in some of our budget, some of our wage information. The league does an annual salary comparison, and we're in the midst of putting that together.
Yeah, so they'll have results, probably by end of August. I want to say that's when they said they would have results by.
So
We
we'll know
might be
before
able
the
to.
next- Sorry, when is the next
Um,
work session on budget?
The next work session will be August 24th, so
Yes.
it might not make it in time for that.
Before we set the preliminary budget, though,
Mhm.
we have to be able to
Yeah.
answer those questions.
I get stuff. Yeah, love what you're doing. Changing my mind a little bit, if the tax rate goes up, we've got to have some really good explanations why.
Mhm.
I think where we're at right now as a city, we need more than we have, but aren't willing to pay for it right now. And it just, once we jump and leapfrog and stuff, we're gonna have more options 3 or 4 years down the road. On the police side and such, I love everything that's done. I wanted to ask one question, Matt. Do we pay overtime to our police officers?
Yes,
Is there a budget,
yes.
5%, 10%? The officers can go. I know you can find it faster than you staring at all these numbers in front of you.
So the numbers are somewhat experiential, so
Okay.
we have, it's not a, you get, we don't say you get this
Yeah.
much hours, so our pre-planned overtime. Which is normally events and things like that, the pre-planned overtime stuff would be. Offered by seniority, some officers might choose to not work any overtime,
Yeah.
other officers will choose to work more of it, things like the TZD grant, things like that. All of the officers at some point or another will have holdover on their shifts, which is somewhat unpredictable.
So what, just a percentage number of overtime? Everything I do on my budgets and stuff are just a flat rate, and then however it's divvied up that way. I don't know why I want that in my head.
So
Give me
it
a
looks
moment.
like right now for 2024 budget, we have for the police officers only, not the admin staff. $47,500 is, I believe, what we have for the overtime. That's separate from some of the event pay,
That's okay.
but overtime at.
But the base pay, with that being overtime, what percentage is that for the overall salary?
So overtime is 3.3%,
Okay. there you go.
over regular. Yeah.
No,
regular time.
just that's one and that I just wanted in my head, so. Some of the retention and all of those things that we've done wouldn't been fantastic, but I think if that number were to go up. I think you'll get. More interested officers because everybody wants overtime. That's about the only way they can get more overtime unless it's a kind of stuff like that. So it's just something in your back of your mind. The other thing, and I mean nothing by this, but Jessica screwed us all up with having to leave us and stuff.
I
like
did,
that.
100%.
I'm above board on everything. I'm worried for us to find someone that number may need to be different than what her salary is right now.
And we'll find that out as.
I'm just saying, the last time we did this and what we posted and we didn't get very much as far as people and then level of experience and stuff, and it was a good choice of what we did. We don't have another one of her in the city hall, do we? Unless Matt wants to jump over or Kevin wants to, and then I think the last time I asked them, no way in hell, I mean, no way they'd ever do that. I'm being open and honest and above board and stuff. We'd be happy to deny your resignation if your mind changes by then, but that is our biggest thing that I think is gonna change this year, to find that caliber of administrator and that stuff. I've talked to a whole bunch of them out there, and my goodness gracious, the money they're making. Again, the stuff you do and everything that's done. You're getting by pretty cheap with what we're going on here. I really, again, it was the great thing and stuff. I'm worried about that spot. We've got some great staff that have supported our administration and us up here. I don't want to take away from any of that stuff, but I don't want to see the same kind of applicants we saw in the last two, other than Jessica. I'd love to see an assistant administrator want to jump forward and take that new lead and stuff. I don't know if we can get by it.
Yeah, I think we'll know a lot more once we have. I lost the page that was handed out, but the first meeting or two with the printer in terms of what needs to be tweaked, maybe. If it's some salary, if it's some just updating with where we are in the city now versus 2 years ago.
While you guys are doing that, can you just say salary based on previous experiences and those kind of things, or do we have to put a window there? This is
We
the high, this is the low.
generally
It
would
is-
want to put a window in of where we would. Just for,
I know we want that, but I just,
and I
If
think,
you don't have
you
a
know-
window, you'll probably get worse candidates. Because they'll assume low. At least I would.
I do think with.
but if it's written in a way that
So we
says,
talk to the recruiter about, that maybe if we are open to the potential of. Put in some sort of increase if they have some exceptional experience.
can you say minimum of? The high side is based off of experience and
Well, I think.
proof and all those.
We
I
have a
mean,
window
here's-
and we ended up going above.
the recruiter knows
we
more.
ended up
I want more applicants. I want more people take from
So figure out a
somewhere.
way to get them that job.
And I do think that we made
If there's anybody
drives with
listening
the
right now,
10% market adjustment for the overall, scale, I think that does help.
Hi, everybody. Did you drive your tractor here? No, but,
all dressed up.
overheated. 5 minutes ago, I was, driving across my field with no shirt on my four-wheeler. It's like. No, I had to help someone out. Glad you made it.
It's not too bad up here.
Kind of going over.
That's my natural sense. It has nothing to do with.
The IT services was big on my list. Y'all can use IT services. Farming it out is not the wisest thing, and I'm speaking from personal experience, somebody in-house and stuff, I think that would be wise, again. Something that is gonna be easier to pay for in the future, but in this transition point of where we're at in our city, as long as we get a good explanation on why the tax rate, if it's gonna be higher, I would support. I don't want to keep skimping it. I don't want to keep just getting by. So, but I do want to keep, like I said, my taxes. Everybody that talks to me, is taxes, what are you doing about it? Like, a bunch of it that's not going to the city. So,
Everybody could keep paying what they had been paying. I understood our earlier answers right. We would still collect another 1.6 million versus last year. So there's
Yeah.
probably a middle ground there where we can avoid an increase, still make some significant improvements.
there's
Quality
a
of service.
What do you think?
Well, my initial read was a 27.5% increase in the budget. It's totally nice. And so I would start there. And I kind of, my thoughts were always like, you're the CEO of the company and we have our things that we want to get done and have happen. But I generally respect your position to do that. Where I would see things, I mean, I think about it from a perspective of a taxpayer, and that would not be okay for an increase in budget. And I know the revenues go up quite a bit, but for me, like, that's almost the total sidebar. So what I've thought is always the inflation plus population growth should be the starting point of the budget. And we haven't had, well, maybe we haven't had budget or inflation and population growth 27.5%. So that my initial read was just the bottom line kind of read. The things that I it's like off the top of my head, when I look at, like, there's a full-time position for like a fire liaison. And then also we have I talked to Matt about it this morning, some medical stuff that we should think about. We don't even have I don't think we even have a description for fire person, and was like a quarter at the end of this year, and we haven't had that person yet, or even, I don't know if we've discussed what they're gonna do. So that jumped out at me. I also, as I was thinking about, you know, if I'm you and I know there are 5 of us, but if I'm like, there are no, if the word is, or if it's no, if an increase has to be like 10%, so population went up 10, or I guess 15 because of 10% inflation, 5% population, whatever it is, I don't even know what it is. So, I would say no, if the budget can't be met, then we just don't do any new initiatives. And just do what we did this year. So no, nothing new from park, nothing new from police, nothing new from city. And, I'm fine with that. If that does that make any sense? I thought there were some things that were gonna be new things.
So I think what I'm hearing is things that we had budgeted for this year, continue what we've got this year, but not necessarily add new positions or increase the position from a part-time to a full.
Yeah, I mean,
Is what I want to make sure.
that's, I think, if for a government, it has to start, well, if you agree with me that it should be populated, we can have a conversation, maybe you don't agree. Population growth plus inflation. But if that's an agreed upon position, then well, I would want you to make the decisions, but absent you making those decisions, then I would say, well, here's what I think.
Yep.
Because we have to close the gap.
I guess I would comment on it, that change of philosophy to going to the population and inflation. The previous philosophy for many years was don't increase the tax rate, and come in under.
That's
So
never been mine.
the generally as the city, the goal has been to continue at least incremental decreases of the tax rate. In order to accomplish that, each year has things that are deferred. So what that results in is the next year bumping up against the cap quickly again, because of that, repeating that same pattern. So even in years where you would feel like we might not have had that, you're still kept. So an example would be IT. I think the first full-time IT person we saw was in a budget 2 years ago, maybe. Or was it last year? Was the first
Last year was the first
presentation of
time.
it. And so that's why, just tracking the inflation and population growth is that change, we're still, it's still trying to do under the same philosophy of the deferrals as a result of trying to keep that rate decreasing. Kind of keeps bumping you back up against that cap the next year as you're trying to catch up to that following year. So
So I do have a estimated number for population growth and the average CPI for the last 12 months. So for Corcoran, the estimated population growth would be 7.25%. And then the average CPI over the last 12 months would be 7%. So that would be 14.25% together.
Yeah, 8.7%. CPI growth.
Yeah, 7%.
Yeah, so, but Matt, and I wanna ask you a question. I wanna understand it better, help you catch up and stuff. But let's just pretend that we had a budget and the next year, the crime rate stays the same, we get the same amount of snow. We have the same amount of permits, the same amount of people need to get the same amount of stuff done, we still need to cut the grass. Like, if the housing values go down, we still have to enforce laws, there are certain things that have to get done. I mean, if it was 2008 and everything went, if it was that kind of draconian cut in the value of a home, then we would have to say well, this is what we would have to increase the tax rate. I don't think I've ever argued that I have argued that I appreciate when the tax rate goes down. And I don't want a tax increase. But they should generally follow each other, increase in population plus inflation, because housing values tend to go up similar to inflation. I think that they would kind of be in lockstep with each other over the long term, with short term gyrations. With that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think to a degree. I think the other part is the lines of business that added by, as a matter of scale, where you now need an IT person, or now, as we're bringing on water people and making investments in fire service. Yeah, I think again, you did preface it by saying in a static community, if you're keeping the crime rate the same and those kinds of things. But I think as the community grows, keeping the crime rate the same and maintaining all of those things is a part of it, but finding that practicality when things come in-house and where we're at the point where eventually you start having savings at a matter of scale, but we're not at that scale yet. So we're trying to get over the hump, as it were. I think Dean mentioned that a little bit shortly before you got here, that we're at the point where things get a little more expensive before they get cheaper in order to keep up. And we know that, as you guys know, the tax dollars come so much later than the services and the demand. That
So is there a way to have an expected budget of 20, I believe there is an economy of scale to be had when a community goes from small to bigger, hiring in-house. We saw that with Kevin. I think Maggie's a part of that. So is there some documentation of that and saying, here's where the savings come, they come in 2025 where we otherwise we're just going on in theory.
I think you and I touched on some of those this morning when we talked about the future of fire service, and we look at how quickly when we look at how those contracts are increasing historically, we can project that out with the community growth. And we've, at least the previous council decisions were that's not sustainable if you're not going to own any part of the investment. And so that's one of the examples of, if we're going to start investing, you are stuck kind of double paying until you can start clawing back that service and getting your savings from taking calls for service back or taking responsibility for providing some of those services. And I don't think that's and I could be wrong, I don't think that's entirely different from water service or IT and some of the other things that we're seeing. And they just happen to hit us at once. And sometimes we defer adding them when we can to try and keep that rate going down, because I think all of us want to provide the best value we can. I don't mean to dominate the budget conversation either.
I did pick on you a little bit.
That's okay. I can take it.
It's like we're all saying. One of the numbers that popped up in my head was I had a conversation with folks over in Maple Grove. They ordered a new brand new engine. Got everything on it except all the supplies, the hoses, everything else, and the base price is $1.2 million for the one piece of the book. Just not gonna I think they said it's 9 months out, but at some point, I don't know how to start buying that stuff without increasing our taxes, and then to know if we do it now in 4 years, we can start decreasing our taxes rapidly because our growth is up, but it's all hearsay. Like we said, just some of the numbers are staggering, but we've got to go at some point and do something. That's why I said if the tax rate is going to go up, we could have a really good explanation. If anybody will pay attention to that. I like what you're saying too. If we just leave it status quo for one more year, what'll that mean? You give everything the way it is. Huh?
Watch the video later.
Oh, okay.
But generally.
Discussion.
We're going right now to say
Oh,
Yeah.
And I agree with a lot of what was said. To me, the second work session has always proven to be much more valuable. The first is good just to get a general sense.
Yeah.
But so many of these numbers get refined in terms of what the actual capacity would be. We already know if we did this today, that there'd be some not insignificant cost to some expected increased costs. So I think we get a lot better picture of where we are there, and then start looking at what positions and what ads can be deferred or eliminated or whatever, based on where we are at that point. So that's kind of what I want to see is where, but overall, wanting to get to that decreased tax rate. At least, and yeah, I think I feel like the gap we had from our first draft last year was largely then to get to the decreased tax rate was largely.
We talked about that today, and yes, last year we had a bigger gap to get, and we'll continue to work on the numbers and try to bring back a variety of
different scenarios.
different scenarios, but if there are things that you'd like to see, if there's something that is in here that there's no appetite for, it'd be great to hear that tonight, so we can, or over the next couple weeks, so we can really flesh this out. If there's not an appetite for, you know, whether it's the part-time intern, if that there's no appetite for that, that's an okay thing to know. We'll just think about whether or not we want to do that.
You guys said it, just again, Mr. Mayor, you guys said it, this is worst case or best case scenario. I'm gonna say worst case, this is what it's gonna cost, best case, this is the wish list of the administration and all of the departments, this is what we want, and we gotta go from there.
So
We
that's,
always start high and pull everything back, so go ahead.
yeah, so this would be the worst case scenario, so we can bring down some line items, the next draft.
Again, I think we said it last time, if any of us win the $900 million lottery, I'll only. You guys figure out what to do.
And Councilor Van just to mention one of the other comments you brought about usage of the police overtime budget. Obviously, our philosophy has been to mitigate overtime whenever feasible.
Absolutely.
So if there is council direction to use the overtime budgets that's there in the same vein as you had talked about, that I would just ask, you know, at a later work session, if the council wants to make direction
Yeah,
to use that, that's a change of philosophy and that's okay. But I would ask for that direction to come from you. Otherwise, currently what we do is we mitigate it
yep.
to whatever degree we can.
I'd rather not spend it either. I just, when we go back to the conversations about retention and those kind of things,
Mhm.
since then, we've had one person leave. I don't know the reasons, I don't know anything, but the people that work for me, I need more overtime, I'm fortunate enough, business I'm in, I can go 25-30%, but then I'm mitigating that by saying in 3 weeks, you're gonna take and work a normal work week and you're gonna have a normal life. So I just know you're doing the right thing, Matt. I just wanted to know what the budget was.
That's one of the reasons why we work hard to keep the TZD grant as well. There is
Yeah.
it's shared with other agencies, so if other agencies start using more, but for right now, our officers have had just about as much as they could want of TZD overtime
It's all
available to
working then for you.
available to
Cool.
them if it works for their schedule and that kind of stuff, or if they're inclined for that type of work. So there is opportunities for them to pick that up, generally speaking, at their desire.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, again, the day-to-day business, you guys do very, very well at. And I thank you all for that. I'm grasping things. And then, like I said, I really do think we've got to look at, with Jessica leaving, we've got to look at something different there. So we get.
Looking cool, looking.
A different pool, yeah. Again, we were lucky to have her as one of the three, and yeah, I'd like to have. We can attract some of these folks from some of our neighboring communities that have done a good job, that would be really cool. But
A
I
bad
got a
leader
wish list
costs
too.
a lot more than a good leader.
I agree with you, but I think with what we did last time, I think we found.
Oh, I would agree, but I'm just making the point that even if it does cost more to attract an excellent person, you'll save that and lower turnover and general chaos that a cut rate administrator might generate.
So if a new person watches, the videos from our recent council meetings or, budget like they all did last time, it's almost like in theory, we should be like, oh yeah, spend whatever you want. We want this city to be good. Yeah.
They definitely did all do that here.
Yeah.
So that means we should start filibustering.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure any future city administrator will love filibusters during a city council
We
meeting.
already got the feedback last time from someone, it was council's difficult to work with one of the applicants. So. hopefully
That was bad.
Brad just threw that in.
Yeah, rather than the comment on his way off.
Yeah, I can't, whatever.
I will
We
say,
haven't
if you're
had a-
looking for markers at the end of the conversation, I'll still say, I want to see the rate flat or go down. I'm flexible with what staff feels is the best way to invest. I'd like to see prioritizations of things that reduce long-term costs, like potentially license plate readers or technology investments like the Granicus for managing minutes and things like that. Let's be as town-wise as we can where it makes sense. And major in the major things that are going to be necessary. Fire might be another area where, because of that long-term trajectory, it makes sense to begin laying that groundwork. So in 2025, we could cut 400K out of the budget because we can start doing something ourselves.
Anything else? That have enough to work?
Yeah, I think that we got good direction and appreciate the discussion and we'll try to bring back some options that give a wide array of options for us as we move forward and provide some feedback on those things that would be good investments and where we think the city should go.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Good work, again,
Thank you.
that's all.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn the work session.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.